Welcome back, dear listener, to another soft-spoken stroll through the shadows of the past. Whether the night is just beginning for you, or you're listening as sleep slowly arrives, I'm happy you've chosen to spend this time here with me. Let me know in the comments, are you listening from somewhere far and quiet, or in the heart of a busy city winding down? And if these calming explorations bring a sense of rest, please consider subscribing. There are countless more voices from the past still waiting to be heard. I'm about to take you on a journey that will completely change how you see ancient Egypt. Forget everything you think you know about pharaohs and golden treasures for a moment. Because today, we're diving into the real Egypt. The Egypt of fishermen hauling in their nets before sunrise, of mothers grinding grain while their children play in the mud, of craftsmen whose calloused hands built monuments that still make us gasp in wonder thousands of years later. Now, I spent months researching this topic, digging through archaeological records, studying hieroglyphic texts, and consulting with leading Egyptologists to bring you the most accurate picture possible of what life was actually like for regular people along the Nile. And what I discovered will shock you. These ancient Egyptians faced the same hopes, fears, and daily challenges that we do today, just in a completely different world. But before we jump into this incredible journey through time, let me give you a preview of what's coming. We're going to follow 3 different families from 3 different social classes as they navigate a single day along the Nile. First, we'll wake up with Khaemweset, a fisherman whose entire world revolves around the river's moods and mysteries. Then we'll step into the workshop of Amenhotep, a skilled craftsman whose artistic talents are in high demand by the wealthy elite. Finally, we'll end our day in the luxurious villa of Nefertiti, not the famous queen, but a wealthy merchant's wife, who shares the name and enjoys privileges most Egyptians could only dream of. Here's what makes this story absolutely fascinating. While we often think of ancient Egypt as this mystical, otherworldly place, the truth is that the Nile created a rhythm of life that was surprisingly predictable, surprisingly modern in many ways. These people weren't just surviving, they were thriving, building communities, raising families, and creating art that still takes our breath away today. The morning mist rises from the Nile like ghostly fingers reaching toward the brightening sky. Khaemweset stretches his weathered arms and feels the familiar ache in his shoulders that comes from years of casting nets and hauling in catches. At 35 years old, he's considered experienced among the fishing community of his small village, located about 20 miles south of Memphis. His calloused hands tell the story of a man who has worked the river since he was barely tall enough to help his father untangle nets. But here's something most people don't realize about ancient Egyptian fishermen. They weren't just catching fish to survive. Khaemweset and his fellow fishermen were part of a sophisticated economy that stretched from the Mediterranean coast all the way to the cataracts of Aswan. The fish they caught weren't just food, they were currency, trade goods, religious offerings, and the foundation of entire communities. As Khaemweset steps outside his modest mud brick home, he can already hear the sounds of his neighborhood coming to life. His wife, Merit, is already grinding grain for the morning bread, the rhythmic scraping of stone against stone providing a steady soundtrack to the dawn. Their 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, are still sleeping on their reed mats, but they'll be up soon to help with the day's work. The house itself tells a story that most tourists to Egypt never hear. These aren't the stone monuments that survive today. This is the Egypt of everyday people. Mud bricks made from Nile silt, palm frond roofs, floors of packed earth. Simple, practical, designed for the realities of life along the river. The walls are decorated not with elaborate hieroglyphs, but with simple geometric patterns painted in red ochre and white limestone paint. There's a small shrine in the corner dedicated to Sobek, the crocodile god who protects fishermen, where Khaemweset leaves small offerings of bread and beer. What strikes you immediately about Khaemweset's world is how completely it revolves around the Nile's annual cycle. Everything, and I mean everything, depends on the river's flood patterns. Right now, it's the season of Akhet, the inundation, when the Nile swells with water from the Ethiopian highlands and spreads across the floodplains. For a fisherman, this is both the most dangerous and most profitable time of year. Kemwaset walks down to the water's edge, where his papyrus boat awaits. These boats are marvels of ancient engineering. Lightweight, flexible, able to navigate both deep channels and shallow marshes. He built this one himself 3 years ago, following techniques passed down through generations. The papyrus reeds were harvested at just the right time, dried properly, bundled with precise tension. A poorly made boat means lost catches, dangerous situations, maybe even drowning. As he prepares his nets, Kemwaset's movements are automatic, practiced, but his mind is always calculating, reading the water, the wind, the sky. Where will the fish be today? The perch like deeper water near the reed beds. The catfish prefer the muddy bottoms where the current is slower. The tilapia. They're everywhere during flood season, but you need to know exactly where to cast your nets to avoid coming up empty. Here's where it gets really interesting. Kemwaset isn't working alone. Egyptian fishing was a community effort, with elaborate systems of cooperation and shared knowledge. As he pushes his boat into the current, he can see Seneb and Tahotep already working the far channel, their movements coordinated like a dance they've performed 1,000 times. When one fisherman spots a good school of fish, he signals the others. When someone's net gets tangled or torn, the whole group stops to help. The social dynamics of these fishing communities were incredibly sophisticated. There were unwritten rules about who could fish where, how catches were divided, what happened when someone got sick or injured. Kemwaset's position in this hierarchy isn't just about his skill, it's about his reputation, his family connections, his willingness to share knowledge and help others. As his net hits the water, Kemwaset feels that familiar moment of suspense. Will this cast bring a good catch? Will he be able to provide for his family today? Will there be enough extra to trade for the pottery, cloth and tools his household needs? The weight of the net as he hauls it in tells him everything, and today, the weight feels promising. But fishing is just one part of Kemwaset's economic world. During flood season, when much of the farmland is underwater, he also works as a labourer on construction projects. The same strong arms that cast nets can carry stone blocks, mix mortar, haul building materials. The Pharaohs' building projects aren't just about royal ego. They're also about providing work and income for people like Kemwaset during the agricultural off-season. The fish he catches today will follow several different paths. Some will be eaten fresh by his own family, grilled over charcoal, seasoned with salt and wild herbs. Some will be preserved, salted, dried, or fermented into a sauce that can last for months. Some will be traded directly with farmers for grain, vegetables, or other necessities. And some will be sold in the markets of Memphis, where city dwellers pay good prices for fresh Nile fish. Meanwhile, across the river, and about a mile upstream, Amenhotep the craftsman is already at work in his workshop. The morning light streaming through the high windows is perfect for the detailed carving work he's doing today, a set of furniture for the tomb of a wealthy scribe. His hands move with the precision that comes from 20 years of experience, his copper chisels following the grain of the imported cedar wood with barely a sound. Amenhotep's world is completely different from Kemwaset's, yet equally dependent on the Nile's rhythms. His workshop sits in the artisan quarter of a larger town, surrounded by the workshops of other specialists, metalworkers, jewelers, painters, potters. The sounds that fill his days aren't the splash of nets or the cry of riverbirds, but the tap of hammers, the scrape of sanders, the quiet concentration of skilled hands creating beautiful objects. The piece he's working on today is a chair that will be placed in a tomb. meant to serve its owner in the afterlife. But here's what's fascinating. This isn't just about death and burial. This chair represents a whole network of economic relationships, artistic traditions, and social expectations that connect everyone from the person who harvested the wood to the wealthy family who commissioned the piece. Amenhotep learned his trade from his father, who learned it from his father before him, but he's also innovated, developed his own techniques, earned a reputation that brings clients from as far away as Thebes. His workshop employs 2 apprentices, boys from local families, who will spend years learning not just how to carve and join wood, but how to read the subtle social signals that determine what styles are fashionable, what materials are preferred, what level of decoration is appropriate for different social classes. The wood he's using today came from Lebanon, brought down the Nile on trading ships that also carried spices, metals, and exotic goods. The tools in his hands were made by metal workers who smelted copper from mines in the eastern desert. The paints and stains he'll use to finish the piece contain pigments from all over the known world. Lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, gold from Nubia, red ochre from local deposits. This interconnectedness is what made Egyptian civilization so remarkably stable and prosperous. Amenhotep's success as a craftsman depends not just on his individual skill, but on a vast network of traders, suppliers, transport workers, and customers that stretches across the ancient world. And at the center of it all flows the Nile, the highway that makes all this commerce possible. As Amenhotep carefully adjusts his grip on the chisel, his mind isn't just focused on the wood before him. He's thinking about his daughter Iaret, who showed such promise with a paintbrush that he's considering breaking tradition and teaching her the craft. In most families, skills pass from father to son, but Amenhotep has seen the work of female artisans in the royal workshops, and their talent speaks louder than convention. The rhythmic tapping of his chisel creates a meditation that connects him to something larger than himself. Each strike removes a tiny piece of cedar, revealing the elegant curve of what will become an armrest. But this isn't just about removing wood. It's about understanding the material, feeling its grain, anticipating how it will respond to pressure and heat and time. Here's something that would amaze you about Amenhotep's world. The level of artistic sophistication among ordinary craftsmen was absolutely extraordinary. We're not talking about the master artists who decorated royal tombs. We're talking about neighborhood workshops where men like Amenhotep created furniture, jewelry, and decorative objects that would be considered museum pieces today. The chair taking shape under his hands tells a story about Egyptian society that goes far beyond craft techniques. The client who commissioned this piece is Bakar, a mid-level scribe in the local temple administration. Not wealthy enough for a tomb like the Pharaohs, but successful enough to afford quality furniture for his eternal rest. This represents the growing middle class of ancient Egypt, educated professionals who could afford luxuries that would have been unimaginable for their grandparents. Bakar visited the workshop 3 weeks ago, bringing detailed specifications written on papyrus. The chair needed to match specific religious requirements, certain proportions that would ensure the deceased could sit properly in the afterlife, decorative elements that would provide spiritual protection, materials that wouldn't decay over the centuries. But within those requirements, Bakar wanted something beautiful, something that reflected his personal taste and social status. The negotiation over price and timeline revealed the complex economics of Amenhotep's profession. Unlike Khaemwaset, whose income depends on daily catches, Amenhotep works on longer cycles. A piece like this chair might take 6 weeks from start to finish, with payment coming in installments, some upfront to buy materials, some at completion, some even after the client's death when the piece is actually placed in the tomb. This delayed payment system requires tremendous trust and community stability. Amenhotep has to believe that Bakar will honor his commitments, that the local economy will remain stable, that social relationships will endure. In return, Bakar has to trust that Amenhotep will deliver work of the agreed quality and finish it on schedule. These aren't just business transactions. They're bonds that hold the community together. The workshop itself reflects this stability and sophistication. The tools hanging on the walls represent decades of investment and refinement. Some were inherited from his father, their wooden handles worn smooth by generations of hands. Others he purchased from specialized tool makers, trading finished pieces for cutting-edge chisels and measuring devices. A few he made himself, adapting standard designs to fit his particular techniques and preferences. The apprentices working alongside him, Keti and Ramos, are learning far more than woodworking techniques. They're absorbing the subtle social knowledge that makes a craftsman successful. How to read a client's true requirements beneath their stated requests. How to negotiate prices without losing face on either side. How to maintain quality standards while working efficiently. How to build the reputation that brings steady work year after year. Watch Katie as he practices joinery techniques on scraps of wood. His movements are still awkward, uncertain, but there's something in his concentration that reminds Amenhotep of himself at that age. The boy has good hands and better instincts. In 5 years, he'll be ready to take on simple commissions of his own. In 10, he might have his own workshop. This apprenticeship system was one of the foundations of Egyptian civilization's remarkable continuity. Skills and knowledge weren't just preserved in written form, they lived in the muscle memory of craftsmen, passed from master to student through thousands of hours of guided practice. When we marvel at the precision of Egyptian artifacts in museums today, we're seeing the end result of this unbroken chain of learning that stretched back centuries. The morning progresses, and the sounds from outside the workshop tell Amenhotep about the rhythm of his community. Vendors calling out their wares as they head toward the market square. Children's voices as they walk to their lessons at the temple school. The clip-clop of donkeys carrying goods to and from the river docks. The distant sound of construction work on a new granary that will store grain for the upcoming harvest season. But it's the absence of certain sounds that really tells the story of Egyptian life during flood season. No creaking of irrigation wheels because the fields are underwater. No singing of harvest workers because the crops won't be ready for months. No grinding of grain in large quantities because families are living off stored supplies from last year's abundance. The Nile's annual cycle creates these rhythms that govern everything from work schedules to social gatherings to religious festivals. Around midday, Amenhotep sets down his tools for the meal break. His wife Henutsen arrives with a basket containing bread still warm from the oven, a jar of beer, dried fish, and some early figs from their garden tree. This isn't just sustenance, it's a social ritual that reinforces family bonds and community connections. As they eat, Henutsen shares news from her morning activities. She's been weaving cloth on her loom, creating the fine linen that Amenhotep's clients often request for upholstery and decorative elements. But she's also been managing a complex network of relationships with other women in the neighborhood, trading recipes, sharing childcare responsibilities, planning for the upcoming festival of Opet. The conversation reveals something crucial about Egyptian society, how completely interdependent everyone was. Henutsen's weaving supplements the family income, but it also provides materials that Amenhotep needs for his work. Her connections with other women create the social capital that brings new clients to the workshop. Her knowledge of local events and festivals helps Amenhotep time his projects to meet religious requirements and social expectations. Their oldest son, Senusret, joins them for the meal. At 15, he's reached the age where he needs to choose his path in life. Will he follow his father into woodworking? Does he have the temperament and skill for such detailed, patient work? Or might he be better suited for one of the other crafts? Metalworking perhaps, or stone carving, or even pursuing education to become a scribe like their client Bakar. This decision isn't just about personal preference, it's about reading the economic and social trends that will shape the next generation. Amenhotep has noticed that demand for luxury furniture is growing as more middle-class families prosper. But he's also heard that the pharaoh is planning massive building projects that will need thousands of skilled workers. Should Sinisret learn a craft that serves individual clients, or one that participates in these grand royal commissions? The family's discussion over their simple meal reveals the forward thinking that characterize successful Egyptian families. They're not just living day to day, they're planning for seasons and years ahead, trying to position themselves and their children for prosperity in a world that's slowly but constantly changing. After the meal, as Amenhotep returns to his carving and Henetson goes back to her loom, the afternoon light begins to slant through the workshop windows at a different angle. This is when the most delicate work happens, when the craftsman's eyes are fresh from the break. But the day's heat hasn't yet made concentration difficult. The cedar chair is beginning to reveal its final form, and with each careful cut, Amenhotep can envision how it will look in Barca's tomb. The legs are taking on their graceful curve. The seat is developing the subtle depression that will cradle its eternal occupant. The backrest is emerging with the hieroglyphic inscription that will identify Barca to the gods of the afterlife. But even as he works on this piece for the dead, Amenhotep is surrounded by life. The bustle of his neighborhood, the chatter of his apprentices, the distant sound of boats on the Nile carrying goods and people between communities that stretch for hundreds of miles along the river's life-giving waters. The afternoon heat begins to settle over the river valley, and in the wealthy quarter of the city, behind walls decorated with painted lotus blossoms and geometric patterns, Nefertiti emerges from her midday rest. This isn't the legendary queen whose bust graces museums worldwide. This is Nefertiti, wife of Jehuti, a successful grain merchant whose ships regularly travel between Memphis and Thebes, carrying the abundance of Egypt's harvests to markets throughout the kingdom. Her world couldn't be more different from that of Kamwaset hauling nets or Amenhotep shaping wood, yet it's connected to theirs in ways that reveal the intricate web of Egyptian society. The linen dress she wears was woven by women like Henetson in workshops throughout the city. The coal that lines her eyes contains minerals that were mined by workers in the eastern desert and transported down the Nile in boats like those Kamwaset sees every day passing his village. Nefertiti's house tells a story of prosperity that most Egyptians could only imagine. Stone floors covered with woven mats, walls painted with scenes of birds and fish from the Nile marshes, rooms filled with furniture that craftsmen like Amenhotep spent months perfecting, a private garden with a pool fed by channels connected to the great river itself. But here's what's fascinating about her daily routine. Even surrounded by luxury, her life still revolves around the same Nile rhythms that govern everyone else. The flood season affects her husband's business just as much as it affects the fisherman's catch or the craftsman's supply of materials. When the river rises, grain prices fluctuate, trade routes shift, and the careful calculations that maintain their wealth require constant attention and adjustment. As she walks through her house, checking on the day's activities, Nefertiti embodies a role that was both privileged and surprisingly demanding. Managing a wealthy household in ancient Egypt wasn't about leisure and luxury. It was about overseeing a complex economic and social operation that employed dozens of people and connected to networks spanning the entire kingdom. In the kitchen courtyard, her cook Hekayeb is preparing the evening meal with ingredients that showcase the diversity of Egypt's trade connections. Fresh fish from the Nile, of course, but also meat from cattle grazed on the delta's rich pastures, vegetables from gardens irrigated by the river's annual floods, spices that arrived on trading ships from lands so distant their names were whispered like magic spells. The preparation of this meal reveals something profound about Egyptian society. How food was never just about sustenance, but about status, religious observance, and social relationships. The bread being baked in the outdoor oven follows recipes that specify different grains for different occasions. The beer fermenting in large jars has been flavored with dates and honey according to proportions that were trade secrets passed down through generations of brewers. Hekaib himself represents one of the most interesting aspects of wealthy Egyptian households, the skilled servants whose expertise was valued almost as much as their labor. He's not just a cook, but a specialist who understands the dietary laws that govern religious festivals, the food preferences of important guests, the seasonal availability of ingredients, and the social meanings attached to different ways of preparing and serving meals. The relationship between Nefertiti and Hekaib illustrates the complex social dynamics that characterized Egyptian households. He's technically her servant, but his knowledge and skills give him a kind of authority that transcends simple hierarchy. When he advises her about menu planning for an upcoming dinner party, she listens carefully because his reputation reflects on her family's social standing. In the main courtyard, Nefertiti's personal maid T is organizing the mistress's jewelry collection, checking each piece for damage and arranging them according to the social calendar for the coming weeks. Tomorrow, there's a temple ceremony honoring Sobek that requires certain religious jewelry. Next week, Jehuti is hosting a business dinner for grain merchants from Aswan, which calls for pieces that display wealth without appearing ostentatious. This attention to detail reveals how thoroughly Egyptian society was organized around visual communication. Every piece of jewelry, every style of dress, every cosmetic choice sent messages about social status, religious devotion, family connections, and personal taste. Nefertiti's appearance when she appears in public isn't just about beauty. It's about maintaining her family's position in the intricate hierarchy that governs their world. The jewelry itself tells stories that connect Nefertiti to the broader Egyptian economy. The gold comes from Nubian mines, worked by laborers whose lives are as harsh as hers is comfortable. The silver arrived on trading ships that also brought cedar wood to craftsmen like Amenhotep. The precious stones were cut and polished by specialists whose workshops line the same streets where Khemweset sells his catch in the early morning markets. But perhaps the most revealing aspect of Nefertiti's afternoon routine is how much time she spends on what we might call business activities. Her husband's grain trading operation requires constant correspondence with agents in other cities, careful tracking of inventory and prices, and delicate negotiations with everyone from farmers to ship captains to temple administrators who control much of the kingdom's grain storage. In the house's main room, scrolls of papyrus cover a low table, each one representing some aspect of the family's commercial interests. Letters from Jehuti's agent in Elephantine report on the quality of this year's harvest in the southern regions. Contracts with ship owners specify delivery dates and payment terms for grain shipments to the Delta. Invoices from suppliers document the purchase of everything from rope for securing cargo to jars for storing grain during transport. Nefertiti's role in managing this information network is crucial, even though she'll never set foot on a grain ship or negotiate directly with farmers. She reads and writes hieratic script fluently, a skill that was far from universal even among the wealthy. Her ability to track complex financial transactions, spot inconsistencies in reports, and maintain relationships with the wives of other merchants makes her an essential partner in the family business. The afternoon progresses with a steady stream of visitors who illustrate the social complexity of Nefertiti's world. First comes Kenti, wife of a temple administrator, bringing news about upcoming religious festivals that will affect grain demand. Then Senebtifi, whose husband captains one of Jehuti's grain ships, reports on river conditions and trade opportunities in the southern cities. Each conversation serves multiple purposes: social bonding, information exchange, business networking, and subtle negotiations about everything from marriage alliances to commercial partnerships. The women share food and drink, exchange gifts, and discuss family news, but beneath the surface of friendship run the currents of calculation that maintain their family's prosperity and social position. What strikes you about these interactions is how knowledgeable these women are. about the broader economic and political forces shaping their world. They discuss flood predictions with the expertise of hydraulic engineers, analyze grain prices with the sophistication of modern commodity traders, and evaluate political developments with the insight of professional diplomats. This knowledge isn't academic, it's desperately practical. A miscalculation about flood timing could leave Jehuti's ships stranded in channels that become too shallow for navigation. An error in predicting grain demand could result in spoiled cargo or missed opportunities. A failure to maintain proper relationships with temple officials could shut the family out of the lucrative contracts that provide much of their income. As the afternoon shadows begin to lengthen, Nefertiti takes time for personal activities that reveal another dimension of wealthy Egyptian life. In her private chamber, she practices writing, copying out religious texts that will improve her standing with the gods and demonstrate her piety to human observers. The act of writing itself is a form of prayer, each hieroglyph carefully formed according to traditions that stretch back to the dawn of Egyptian civilization. The text she's copying today is a hymn to Hapi, the god of the Nile flood, whose annual gift of fertile silt makes all Egyptian prosperity possible. As she writes, she's participating in a tradition that connects her to every other literate person in the kingdom, from royal scribes in the palace to provincial administrators in distant outposts along the river. But her writing practice also serves practical purposes. The grain business requires constant correspondence, and the quality of her script reflects on her family's education and sophistication. When she writes to the wife of a grain dealer in Thebes, her elegant hieroglyphs communicate not just information, but also social status and cultural refinement. In another part of the house, her children are engaged in their own afternoon activities that prepare them for their future roles in Egyptian society. Her son, Khaimouaset, named after the fisherman we met this morning, though their social worlds will never intersect, is studying mathematics with a tutor, learning the complex calculations required for managing trade operations and calculating taxes. Her daughter Meritptah is learning to weave on a miniature loom, her small fingers already developing the dexterity that will make her valuable as a wife and household manager. But she's also learning to read and write, skills that will allow her to participate in the business and social networks that maintain wealthy families' positions across generations. The education these children receive illustrates one of the most remarkable aspects of Egyptian civilization: how knowledge and skills were systematically transmitted from one generation to the next. Unlike many ancient societies where learning was restricted to tiny elites, Egypt developed educational systems that produced the large numbers of literate, skilled professionals Khaimouaset's mathematics required by their complex administrative and commercial systems. Young lessons aren't just about abstract numbers. They're about calculating the volume of grain that fits in differently shaped containers, determining how much a ship can carry without becoming dangerously overloaded, and figuring out exchange rates between different types of goods and currencies. These practical applications make the learning immediate and relevant to his future responsibilities. Meanwhile, Meritptah's weaving practice connects her to women throughout Egyptian society, from the servants in her own house, to the wives of craftsmen like Henutson, to the specialized textile workers who produce the finest linens for royal and religious use. The patterns she learns to create carry meanings that will allow her to communicate social messages through her family's clothing and household decorations. As the afternoon draws toward evening, the sounds from outside Nefertiti's compound tell the story of a community preparing for night. Vendors calling out final bargains as the markets prepare to close, children playing games in the dusty streets before being called home for evening meals, the distant sound of temple ceremonies as priests perform the daily rituals that maintain the god's favor and ensure the Nile's continued bounty. But it's the rhythm of boats on the river that provides the constant soundtrack to life in Nefertiti's world. The splash of oars as fishermen like Khaimouaset return with their day's catch. The creak of ropes and wood as merchant vessels like those owned by her husband navigate the channels between sandbars and reed beds. The calls of sailors and dock workers as cargo is loaded and unloaded at the busy wharves that connect this city to the broader Egyptian world. Inside the compound, preparations begin for the evening meal that will bring the family together after their separate daily activities. The kitchen fills with the aromas of roasting meat, baking bread, and brewing beer. Servants light oil lamps as the sun begins its descent toward the western horizon. The house transforms from a busy center of daytime activity into a more intimate space for family gathering and social bonding. Tonight's dinner will include guests, other merchant families with whom Jehuti maintains both business and social relationships. The meal will serve multiple purposes: strengthening personal bonds, exchanging information about trade conditions and opportunities, negotiating future business arrangements, and displaying the family's prosperity and sophistication to important members of their social network. The preparation for this dinner reveals the incredible complexity of social life among wealthy Egyptians. Every detail, from the specific dishes served to the arrangement of seating to the entertainment provided, carries meaning that the guests will read and interpret. Success in maintaining their social and economic position requires Nefertiti and her family to navigate these meanings with the skill of accomplished diplomats. The menu itself tells a story about Egyptian trade networks and social hierarchy. The main course features beef from cattle raised on estates in the delta, demonstrating the family's connections to agricultural regions hundreds of miles away. The vegetables come from their own gardens, showcasing their ability to maintain productive land in the competitive urban environment. The wine is imported from oases in the Western Desert, a luxury that signals both wealth and sophisticated taste. But perhaps most importantly, the fish course features several varieties that can only be caught by skilled fishermen like Kemweset, prepared according to recipes that require the expertise of cooks like Hekaib, and served on dishes created by craftsmen like Amenhotep. This single meal connects the wealthy merchant's table to the daily labor of dozens of people from every level of Egyptian society. As servants arrange flowers and light incense in preparation for the guests' arrival, Nefertiti reviews the social and business objectives for the evening. There are subtle negotiations to be conducted about a joint venture in the southern grain trade, delicate inquiries to be made about marriage possibilities for their children, information to be gathered about political developments that might affect trade policies and taxation. These conversations will unfold according to elaborate social protocols that govern interaction among the Egyptian elite. Direct business discussion is considered crude. Instead, important topics are approached through stories, casual observations, and carefully worded questions that allow both parties to retreat gracefully if negotiations don't proceed favorably. The evening ahead represents just one day in the continuous cycle of relationship management that maintains wealthy families' positions in Egyptian society. Tomorrow will bring different guests, different negotiations, different opportunities and challenges, but the fundamental rhythms remain constant. The daily round of activities that connect every Egyptian, from fishermen to pharaohs, to the great river that makes their civilization possible. As the sun sets over the Nile, casting long shadows across the water that has nourished this land for thousands of years, the separate worlds of Kemweset, Amenhotep, and Nefertiti continue their ancient dance of interdependence. The fish caught at dawn becomes part of the evening feast. The furniture crafted in afternoon workshops graces the homes where business relationships are forged and maintained. The grain traded by wealthy merchants feeds the families of fishermen and craftsmen throughout the kingdom. This is the real magic of ancient Egypt, not the monuments and treasures that capture our imagination today, but the intricate web of relationships and activities that allowed millions of people to thrive along the banks of a single river for over 3,000 years. The evening light transforms the Nile into a ribbon of molten gold, and across this ancient waterway, three worlds that seemed separate during the daylight hours begin to converge in ways that reveal the true genius of Egyptian civilization. What happens next will show you exactly how a society built around a single river, created connections so intricate, so perfectly balanced, that they sustained one of history's greatest civilizations for millennia. Khaemwaset secures his boat to the wooden posts that mark his family's section of the riverbank. But his day is far from over. The fish in his nets represent just the beginning of a complex evening routine that connects him to networks stretching far beyond his small village. As he sorts his catch by size and type, he's making calculations that would impress modern economists. Which fish to keep for his family, which to preserve for lean times, which to trade immediately while they're fresh, and which to save for tomorrow's market in the larger town downstream. But here's what makes this absolutely fascinating. Khaemwaset isn't working in isolation. As the sun sets, boats converge from villages up and down this stretch of river, creating an impromptu market right here on the muddy shore. Seneb arrives from the north with a boat full of waterfowl he's trapped in the marshes. Tahotep brings baskets of lotus roots and papyrus shoots that his family harvests from the reed beds. Nebamun, whose village specializes in net making, has brought repairs and new equipment to trade. This evening market reveals something profound about Egyptian society that most people never realize. These weren't primitive people struggling to survive. They were participants in a sophisticated economic system that operated without currency, without banks, without any of the financial institutions we think are necessary for complex trade. Instead, they used something far more elegant, a system of reciprocal relationships built on generations of trust and mutual dependence. Watch how Khaemwaset negotiates with Seneb over a trade of fish for duck eggs. There's no haggling, no argument about value. Both men know exactly what their goods are worth in relation to each other. Knowledge passed down through families and refined through daily practice. The exchange takes seconds, but it's backed by decades of relationship building and community knowledge. Merit appears at Khaemwaset's shoulder, carrying a large pottery jar filled with the beer she brewed last week. This isn't just for family consumption, it's trade goods, currency, social lubricant all rolled into one. The quality of a woman's beer was a mark of family status, and Merit's brewing has a reputation that extends to neighboring villages. Tonight, jars of her beer will be traded for everything from sandals to jewelry to the services of the village healer. The children aren't just observers in this evening economy. They're active participants, learning skills they'll need as adults. Khaemwaset's eldest son Kheti helps his father arrange fish for display, learning to read the subtle signs that indicate which customers are serious buyers and which are just browsing. His daughter Itet works alongside her mother, learning the art of negotiation that governs trades between women, how to assess the quality of bread, how to evaluate textiles, how to maintain relationships that will benefit the family for years to come. But the most remarkable aspect of this evening market is how it connects people across social boundaries that seem absolute during the day. That well-dressed man examining Seneb's ducks isn't a fellow fisherman. He's a steward from one of the wealthy estates upriver, buying fresh food for his master's household. The woman trading fine jewelry for pottery isn't from the village at all. She's the wife of a successful craftsman from the district capital, here because she knows the village potters produce work that rivals anything available in the city markets. These interactions reveal the hidden mobility within Egyptian society. While the class system was rigid in many ways, there were also opportunities for ambitious, skilled people to improve their circumstances through trade, craftsmanship, and relationship building. Khaemwaset's reputation as a reliable fisherman has earned him customers from social classes far above his own, and the income from these relationships allows his family luxuries that would have been impossible for his grandparents. As the evening progresses and the impromptu market begins to wind down, families gather around small fires built on the shore. This isn't just about cooking the evening meal. It's about community bonding, information sharing, and the transmission of cultural knowledge that holds Egyptian society together. Children listen wide-eyed as elders tell stories about the great floods of decades past. about legendary fishermen whose exploits have become village folklore, about the time when royal messengers came through announcing the Pharaohs' victory over foreign enemies. These stories aren't just entertainment. They're the oral tradition that preserves essential knowledge about river patterns, weather prediction, and survival strategies. When old Amenemhab tells about the year the flood came 3 weeks late, he's teaching young fishermen to read the subtle signs that predict unusual flood patterns. When Sennacherib recounts the great fish kill that happened when he was a boy, she's passing on crucial information about pollution sources and water quality that could save lives in the future. The evening meal itself becomes a celebration of the day's successes and the community's resilience. Families share food with neighbors whose luck was poor, ensuring that no one goes hungry, regardless of their individual fortune. This mutual support system is one of the foundations of village stability. It allows people to take the risks necessary for innovation and improvement, knowing that temporary failures won't result in disaster for their families. As the fires burn down and families begin to drift back to their homes, the river continues its ancient rhythm. Night fishermen push their boats into the current, pursuing different species that feed in the darkness. The sound of their voices calling to each other across the water provides a constant reminder that the Nile never sleeps, never stops providing for those who understand its moods and patterns. Meanwhile, in his workshop across the river, Amenhotep works by lamplight on the final details of Barka's chair. This isn't unusual. Craftsmen often work into the evening, taking advantage of the cooler air and the focused concentration that comes after the day's interruptions have ended. The steady scrape of his sandstone smoothing tool creates a meditative rhythm that helps him think through the challenges of tomorrow's work. But tonight's late work session serves a special purpose. Tomorrow is the new moon, considered the most auspicious time for beginning the decorative painting that will transform the chair from fine furniture into a sacred object suitable for the afterlife. The timing isn't arbitrary. Egyptian craftsmen operated according to religious calendars that governed everything from when to start major projects, to what materials could be used on specific days. The preparation for tomorrow's painting reveals the sophisticated technical knowledge that made Egyptian craftsmanship legendary throughout the ancient world. Amenhotep mixes his own pigments from minerals and plants, following recipes that balance color intensity with longevity. The blue comes from ground lapis lazuli mixed with egg white and tree resin. The red combines ochre with plant extracts that prevent fading. The gold leaf requires adhesive made from fish bladders and honey, applied with brushes made from cat hair. Each of these materials tells a story about Egyptian trade networks and technical innovation. The lapis lazuli traveled over 1,000 miles from mines in Afghanistan, passing through the hands of dozens of traders before reaching Amenhotep's workshop. The ochre comes from deposits in the eastern desert, mined by workers whose lives are as harsh as the landscape they inhabit. The fish bladders are a byproduct of the fishing industry, demonstrating how Egyptian craftsmen found uses for materials that other cultures would discard. As Amenhotep prepares his materials, his wife Hennetzen works beside him on her own evening project, weaving a piece of linen so fine that it will be used to wrap precious objects in wealthy tombs. The thread she uses is spun from flax grown in the delta, processed according to techniques that produce fabric rivaling modern textiles in quality and durability. Each thread must be perfectly uniform, each weave absolutely consistent, because any flaw will be visible in the finished cloth. The coordination between husband and wife reveals another aspect of Egyptian craftsmanship, how skills were often complementary within families, creating economic units more powerful than individual specialists could achieve alone. Amenhotep's furniture often requires fabric elements, and Henutzen's weaving benefits from the fine woodwork that displays it to best advantage. Together, they can offer clients complete solutions that justify premium prices and build lasting relationships. Their children participate in this evening work session according to their ages and abilities. Senusret, still undecided about his future career, practices carving techniques on scraps of wood while observing his father's painting preparation. Ieret, showing increasing skill with decorative arts, helps her mother with the intricate counting required for complex weaving patterns. Even young Ptahhotep, barely old enough to hold tools safely, sorts materials and maintains the oil lamps that provide working light. This family workshop scene illustrates one of the most important aspects of Egyptian society: how knowledge and skills were transmitted not through formal schools, but through intimate daily interaction between generations. Every evening work session was a teaching opportunity. Every completed project a chance for young people to observe master-level techniques. Every mistake a learning experience that built competence and confidence. The conversation that flows around the work reveals the broader context that shapes craftsman life. Hennetzen shares news from her morning visit to the market, including information about changing fashion preferences among wealthy clients and rumors about upcoming royal building projects that might require specialized skills. Amenhotep discusses technical problems he's solved recently and new techniques he's heard about from craftsmen in other cities. But the most revealing part of their evening conversation concerns their children's futures. Senusret's indecision about career paths reflects the expanding opportunities available to skilled families in Egyptian society. Traditional craftsmanship remains profitable and respected, but new specializations are emerging as the economy becomes more complex. Should he focus on luxury furniture for wealthy clients? Or would he do better learning architectural woodwork for the massive construction projects that employ thousands of workers? Yaret's obvious talent for decorative arts presents different challenges. While female craftsmen exist and sometimes achieve considerable success, the paths available to them are more limited and require careful navigation of social expectations. Should the family break tradition and teach her advanced techniques? Or would it be safer to ensure she masters the domestic skills that make women valuable as wives and household managers? These discussions reveal how Egyptian families balance tradition with innovation, security with opportunity, individual talents with social expectations. The decisions made in workshops like Amenhotep's didn't just affect individual families. They shaped the evolution of Egyptian craftsmanship and influenced the broader cultural developments that kept the civilization vibrant and adaptable. As the evening progresses, visitors arrive at the workshop, drawn by the light and the opportunity to observe master craftsmen at work. Baka himself appears, eager to see the progress on his chair and to discuss the symbolic elements that will be incorporated into tomorrow's painting. Behind him comes Seneb, a young scribe from the local temple administration, who's considering commissioning a writing desk for his own use. These visits transform the workshop into a social space where business relationships develop and strengthen. Baka examines the chair's construction with the critical eye of someone whose afterlife comfort depends on the craftsmanship, but he also engages in broader conversation about family news, local politics, and economic conditions. The interaction builds the personal connection that ensures he'll return to Amenhotep for future projects and recommend the workshop to other potential clients. Seneb's presence represents the kind of relationship building that successful craftsmen cultivate constantly. He's not ready to commission work yet, but by visiting regularly and showing interest in the craft, he's establishing the foundation for future business. When he does decide to order furniture, he'll choose a craftsman he knows and trusts, rather than someone whose work he's only heard about secondhand. The technical discussions that emerge from these visits reveal the sophisticated understanding that Egyptian clients brought to commissioning custom work. Baka doesn't just want a chair, he wants specific symbolic elements that will ensure proper treatment in the afterlife, particular proportions that reflect his social status, and decorative details that demonstrate his religious devotion. Meeting these requirements demands not just technical skill, but deep knowledge of religious traditions and social conventions. As the evening draws toward its close, the workshop gradually empties of visitors, leaving the family to complete their preparations for tomorrow's work. Tools are cleaned and arranged according to the specific requirements of painting work. Materials are organized in the precise order they'll be needed. The work surface is prepared with the ritual care that Egyptian craftsmen brought to all their activities. This attention to preparation reveals one of the secrets behind Egyptian craftsmanship's legendary quality, the understanding that excellent work begins long before tools touch materials. The time spent organizing, planning, and preparing creates the conditions that allow skills to flourish and innovations to emerge. When Amenhotep begins painting tomorrow, every movement will be purposeful, every decision informed by careful thought and preparation. The family's evening prayers, conducted before the household shrine, place their work in the broader cosmic context that gave meaning to Egyptian life. They offer thanks to Ptah, patron god of craftsmen, for the day's progress and ask for divine guidance in tomorrow's challenging painting work. They remember ancestors whose skills and knowledge made their current prosperity possible, and they pray for their children's success in whatever paths they choose to follow. These religious observances aren't separate from the family's economic activities, they're integral to them. Egyptian craftsmen understood their work as participation in the divine order that maintained cosmic harmony and ensured the kingdom's prosperity. The chair taking shape under Amenhotep's hands isn't just furniture, it's a contribution to the spiritual infrastructure that supported Egyptian civilization. As oil lamps are extinguished and the family prepares for sleep, the workshop falls silent except for the distant sounds of river life that provide a constant soundtrack to Egyptian existence. But in the morning, the space will come alive again with the focused energy of skilled hands, creating beautiful objects that will outlast their makers by thousands of years. In the wealthy quarter of the city, Nefertiti's evening entertainment reaches its climax as the dinner guests settle into serious conversation about the business and political developments that affect their family's fortunes. The meal has been a success. The food expertly prepared, the service seamless, the social dynamics carefully managed to create an atmosphere conducive to the delicate negotiations that are the evening's real purpose. But what's happening around this table goes far beyond simple business discussion. These conversations reveal the sophisticated intelligence networks that wealthy Egyptian families maintained to stay informed about developments throughout the kingdom. Katie, whose grain ships regularly travel to Nubia, reports on political tensions in the southern provinces that could affect trade routes. Senebkai, married to a temple administrator in Thebes, shares information about religious festivals and their impact on grain demand. Nebnacht, whose brother serves in the royal administration, offers carefully worded insights about court politics and policy changes. This information exchange operates according to subtle rules that govern elite social interaction. Direct questions about sensitive topics are considered crude, so important intelligence is shared through stories, casual observations, and seemingly innocent comments that allow knowledgeable listeners to draw their own conclusions. The skill required to navigate these conversations successfully demonstrates why wealthy Egyptian families invested so heavily in their children's education. Nefertiti's role as hostess requires her to orchestrate these information flows while maintaining the social harmony that makes such exchanges possible. She guides conversation away from topics that might create conflict, ensures that each guest has opportunities to share valuable intelligence, and carefully balances the competing interests that could otherwise disrupt the cooperative relationships her family depends on. The women's separate conversations, conducted simultaneously with the men's business discussions, focus on different but equally important aspects of maintaining family prosperity. They discuss marriage possibilities for their children, evaluate the social implications of various families' recent successes or failures, and share practical knowledge about everything from household management to investment opportunities. These parallel conversations reveal the sophisticated division of labor that characterized wealthy Egyptian marriages. While men focused on direct business operations, women managed the social and informational networks that made business success possible. Both roles required intelligence, skill, and deep knowledge of Egyptian society's complex dynamics. As the evening progresses, specific deals and arrangements begin to take shape through the careful verbal dance that governs elite negotiations. Jehuti and Katie explore the possibility of a joint venture in the lucrative Nubian grain trade, each man offering resources and expertise while carefully protecting his family's core interests. The preliminary agreement they reach will require weeks of detailed negotiation, but tonight's conversation establishes the personal trust that makes such complex partnerships possible. The entertainment provided between courses serves purposes beyond simple pleasure. A young musician performs songs that celebrate recent Egyptian military victories, reinforcing the political loyalties that are essential for maintaining government contracts. A storyteller recounts tales of successful merchants from earlier generations, providing both inspiration and practical lessons about business strategy. A dancer performs routines that display the cultural sophistication that marks families as worthy of elite social status. But perhaps the most revealing aspect of the evening's entertainment is how it showcases the family's connections to craftsmen and artists throughout Egyptian society. The musician's instrument was created by a master craftsman whose reputation extends throughout the kingdom. The storyteller's tales draw on oral traditions maintained by professional entertainers who travel between wealthy households. The dancer's costume incorporates textiles and jewelry produced by specialized artisans whose work defines current fashion trends. These connections demonstrate how wealthy Egyptian families served as patrons and customers for the broader artistic community, creating economic opportunities that supported cultural development throughout the kingdom. The demand for luxury goods and sophisticated entertainment, generated by elite households, provided livelihoods for thousands of skilled workers and contributed to the artistic achievements that made Egyptian civilization famous throughout the ancient world. As the formal dinner concludes and guests prepare to depart, the evening's real business continues through private conversations between selected individuals. Jehuti and Senebkai step into the garden to discuss details of their potential partnership away from other guests who might be competitors. Nefertiti and Katie's wife, Nefret, withdraw to a private chamber to explore marriage possibilities between their children. These intimate negotiations reveal the personal relationships that underlie Egyptian commercial success. Business partnerships aren't just economic arrangements, they're extensions of family networks that provide security and opportunity across generations. The marriage alliance being discussed between Nefertiti and Nefret will create bonds between their families that could influence trade relationships, political positions, and social status for decades to come. The careful attention paid to these relationship-building activities demonstrates why wealthy Egyptian families invested so much time and resources in social events like tonight's dinner. The immediate costs of hospitality are significant, but their investments in the network of connections that generate long-term prosperity and security. A single evening's entertainment can create business opportunities worth many times its cost. As the last guests depart and servants begin cleaning up after the evening's festivities, Nefertiti and Jehuti review the night's accomplishments. New business relationships have been established, existing partnerships have been strengthened, valuable information has been gathered, and their family's social position has been reinforced through successful hospitality. The evening represents a significant success in the ongoing work of maintaining their prosperity. But even as they celebrate the night's achievements, both husband and wife are already planning future social events that will build on tonight's foundation. Egyptian elite society operated according to cycles of reciprocal hospitality, with families taking turns hosting gatherings that served both social and business purposes. Next month, there'll be guests at similar dinners hosted by other families, and their behavior tonight will influence how they're received and what opportunities they're offered. The cleanup process itself reveals the complex logistics required to maintain wealthy Egyptian households. Servants work according to carefully organized systems that ensure valuable items are properly stored. perishable foods are preserved or distributed, and the house is restored to readiness for normal daily activities. The coordination required demonstrates the management skills that made Nefertiti an essential partner in her family's business operations. As the household settles into nighttime routines, the sounds from outside remind everyone of the broader community that surrounds their privileged world. Night fishermen call to each other as they work the dark waters. Temple priests chant evening prayers that carry across the still air. Craftsmen working late in their workshops maintain the rhythmic sounds of productive labor that never completely stops in Egyptian cities. These sounds connect Nefertiti's luxurious world to the daily labor of people like Khemwaset and Amenhotep, reminding her that her family's prosperity depends on the skills and efforts of thousands of other Egyptians. The fish served at tonight's dinner came from nets cast by fishermen she'll never meet. The furniture that impressed her guests was created by craftsmen whose names she doesn't know. The grain that generates her family's wealth was grown by farmers whose lives are as distant from hers as the stars. But in the morning, the interconnections that bind Egyptian society together will become visible again as the daily cycle of trade, craftsmanship, and social interaction resumes. The empty grain jars in Khemwaset's village will be refilled by shipments from merchants like Jehuti. The chairs and tables in Amenhotep's workshop will eventually grace houses like Nefertiti's. The prosperity generated by wealthy families' business activities will create employment and opportunities for skilled workers throughout the kingdom. This is the real magic of Egyptian civilization, not the monuments and treasures that capture modern imagination, but the intricate web of relationships and economic activities that allowed millions of people to prosper along a single river for over 3,000 years. As night settles over the Nile Valley and its people rest before another day of interconnected labor and life, the great river continues its eternal flow, carrying the waters that tomorrow will again sustain fishermen and pharaohs, craftsmen and merchants, in the endless cycle that made Egypt the wonder of the ancient world. The pre-dawn darkness along the Nile carries sounds that have echoed across these waters for countless generations. The gentle lap of waves against reed-lined shores, the distant call of night herons returning from their hunting grounds, the soft splash of oars as the earliest fishermen begin their daily pursuit of the river's bounty. But this morning brings something different. Something that will reveal just how deeply interconnected these seemingly separate worlds of Egyptian society truly are. Khemwaset wakes not to his usual rhythm, but to urgent voices from the riverbank. A messenger boat has arrived in the pre-dawn darkness, carrying news that will ripple through every level of society, from the humblest fishing village to the most luxurious merchant compounds. The annual flood, which should still be weeks away, is rising faster than anyone predicted. The distant rains in the Ethiopian highlands have been unusually heavy, and the great river is already beginning its transformation from predictable waterway to life-giving deluge. This news changes everything, and the speed with which information travels through Egyptian society reveals one of its most remarkable features: the communication networks that kept this vast kingdom functioning as a coordinated whole. Within hours, every village, every workshop, every wealthy household along hundreds of miles of riverbank will know about the early flood and will begin adjusting their plans accordingly. For Khemwaset, the early flood means opportunity mixed with danger. Fish populations will shift as water levels rise, creating chances for exceptional catches, but also requiring knowledge and skills that separate experienced fishermen from novices. The muddy backwaters that will soon form behind natural levees become nurseries for young fish, but reaching them requires navigation skills that can mean the difference between prosperity and disaster. As he prepares his boat in the grey pre-dawn light, Khemwaset's movements reflect decades of experience reading the river's moods. The slight change in watercolour tells him about sediment loads from upstream. The behaviour of waterbirds indicates shifts in fish populations that most people would never notice. The sound of the current against his boat's hull reveals information about underwater obstacles and channel depths that could save his life in the dangerous weeks ahead. But what's most remarkable about this morning is how quickly Kemwaset's individual knowledge becomes community knowledge. As other fishermen arrive at the riverbank, information flows between them with the efficiency of a well-designed intelligence network. Senab reports unusual behavior among the marsh birds that suggests fish are already moving toward their flood season feeding grounds. Tahotep shares observations about water temperature changes that indicate the flood's intensity and likely duration. This collective intelligence gathering represents one of ancient Egypt's greatest innovations, the systematic accumulation and sharing of practical knowledge that allowed ordinary people to thrive in an environment that could easily have destroyed less organized societies. Every fisherman's observations contribute to a body of knowledge that helps the entire community adapt to changing conditions. The social dynamics of this information sharing reveals something profound about Egyptian society. Despite the rigid hierarchies that governed formal interactions, when it came to survival knowledge, status barriers dissolved. The youngest fisherman's observation about unusual current patterns receives the same serious attention as insights from the most experienced elders. This pragmatic egalitarianism in the face of environmental challenges helped Egyptian communities maintain stability through natural disasters that devastated other civilizations. As the morning progresses and the implications of early flooding become clear, Kemwaset finds himself at the center of rapidly shifting economic calculations. The fish he catches today won't just feed his family or provide goods for local trade. They'll become part of an emergency food distribution system that activates automatically whenever the Nile behaves unpredictably. Wealthy families in the cities, anticipating disruptions to normal food supplies, will pay premium prices for preserved fish that can be stored safely during the chaotic flood period. This transformation from local subsistence to regional commerce happens so smoothly that it reveals the sophisticated economic structures underlying Egyptian society. What appears to be a simple fishing village is actually a node in a distribution network that can rapidly redirect resources to wherever they're most needed. The relationships Kemwaset has built with traders and merchants suddenly become crucial lifelines that connect his family's welfare to opportunities across the entire kingdom. The technical challenges of fishing during flood conditions require innovations that showcase the practical intelligence that made Egyptian civilization so resilient. Traditional nets become useless in the turbulent waters, so fishermen like Kemwaset switch to specialized traps and weirs that work with the flood's power rather than against it. These techniques, passed down through generations and refined through constant experimentation, represent a form of engineering knowledge that rivals anything developed by formal architects and builders. As Kemwaset works to modify his equipment for flood conditions, his children observe every detail with the focused attention that characterizes Egyptian education at all social levels. They're learning not just specific techniques, but the problem-solving approaches that allow people to thrive in an unpredictable environment. The ability to rapidly assess changing conditions and adapt strategies accordingly is what separates successful Egyptian families from those that merely survive. The flood's early arrival also reveals the hidden connections between Kemwaset's world and the broader Egyptian economy. The grain merchants who depend on predictable harvest cycles will need alternative food sources to maintain their trading relationships. The construction projects that employ thousands of workers during flood season will require increased food supplies as labor camps swell with farmers displaced from their flooded fields. Suddenly, every fish Kemwaset catches becomes part of a complex supply chain that keeps Egyptian civilization functioning during its most vulnerable period. Meanwhile, across the river in his workshop, Amenhotep faces his own set of flood-related challenges and opportunities. The early rising waters will disrupt transportation networks that bring materials from distant sources, but they'll also create increased demand for the specialized items that wealthy families need to protect their possessions during the chaotic flood periods. Storage chests that can withstand moisture, portable furniture that can be quickly moved to safety, decorative objects that maintain their beauty despite challenging conditions. These become essential items that command premium prices. The technical expertise required to create flood-resistant furnishings reveals another dimension of Egyptian craftsmanship that modern observers often overlook. These craftsmen weren't just artists creating beautiful objects, they were engineers solving practical problems that affected people's daily lives and long-term prosperity. The joints Amenhotep cuts today must remain tight despite dramatic changes in humidity. The finishes he applies must protect underlying materials from moisture damage that could destroy months of careful work. But perhaps most importantly, the flood's early arrival demonstrates how Egyptian craftsmen served as crucial links in information networks that kept the kingdom functioning. Amenhotep's clients include people from every level of society, and his workshop becomes a gathering place where news and insights flow between social classes that rarely interact directly. The wealthy merchant commissioning flood-resistant storage furniture shares information about trade disruptions. The temple administrator ordering portable ritual objects provides insights about religious responses to natural disasters. The government official seeking specialized equipment reveals details about official preparations for managing flood-related challenges. This information flow transforms Amenhotep's workshop from a simple production facility into a kind of intelligence hub where economic, political, and social developments from across the region are analyzed and discussed. The craftsman's role as a neutral figure trusted by multiple social groups allows him to serve as an informal mediator and advisor whose influence extends far beyond his apparent status in the formal hierarchy. The flood's early arrival also reveals how Egyptian families prepared for uncertainty through diversified skill sets that modern specialists might find surprising. Hainutzen's weaving takes on new urgency as demand increases for waterproof coverings and quick-drying textiles. Her knowledge of plant fibers and natural treatments that resist moisture becomes valuable expertise that attracts customers from far beyond the local community. The children's education shifts into high gear as parents realize that survival skills take precedence over formal learning during crisis periods. Senusret abandons his indecision about career paths and throws himself into mastering whatever techniques might prove useful in the challenging weeks ahead. Yaret's artistic talents find new applications in creating decorative elements that can withstand flood conditions. Even young Ptahhotep contributes by helping organize materials and maintain the workshop's efficiency during the frantic activity that precedes major floods. This family mobilization illustrates one of Egyptian society's greatest strengths, the ability to rapidly adapt roles and responsibilities when circumstances demand flexibility. The rigid social structures that govern normal times give way to pragmatic cooperation that prioritizes survival and mutual support over formal status distinctions. Families that can make these transitions successfully emerge from crises stronger and more prosperous than before. As the morning progresses and news of the early flood spreads throughout the craftsman community, Amenhotep's workshop becomes the center of collaborative problem-solving that showcases Egyptian innovation at its most practical level. Neighboring craftsmen arrive to share techniques for waterproofing materials, preserving tools, and maintaining work quality despite challenging conditions. The knowledge exchange that emerges from these conversations represents the kind of technical innovation that kept Egyptian civilization at the forefront of ancient world development. The economic implications of early flooding create opportunities that demonstrate how Egyptian society rewarded adaptability and innovation. Craftsmen who can quickly modify their products to meet changed conditions suddenly find themselves with more work than they can handle. The premium prices available for specialized flood-related items can generate enough income to support families through the entire flood season and provide capital for expansion when normal conditions return. But the most revealing aspect of this crisis response is how it exposes the deep social bonds that hold Egyptian communities together despite their apparent class divisions. Wealthy clients advance payments to craftsmen they trust, ensuring that skilled workers have resources to adapt their operations to flood conditions. Successful artisans share techniques and materials with struggling neighbours, understanding that community-wide prosperity benefits everyone in the long run. This mutual support system operates according to principles that balance individual success with collective welfare, creating incentives for both personal achievement and community cooperation. The result is a society that can respond to crises with remarkable speed and effectiveness, while maintaining the social cohesion necessary for long-term stability and prosperity. In the wealthy quarter of the city, Nefertiti's household transforms with military-like efficiency as news of the early flood triggers emergency preparations that have been refined through generations of experience managing natural disasters. The luxury and leisure that characterized yesterday's activities give way to focused activity that reveals another dimension of wealthy Egyptian life, the serious responsibilities that come with prosperity and social position. The information networks that wealthy families maintain for commercial purposes suddenly become crucial intelligence systems that can mean the difference between preserving or losing fortunes built over generations. Servants dispatch urgent messages to business partners throughout the kingdom, warning of changed conditions and requesting updates on local situations that could affect trade operations. The speed and accuracy of these communications demonstrate the sophisticated logistics that supported Egyptian commerce across vast distances and diverse environments. But what's most remarkable about the wealthy household's flood response is how it reveals the hidden infrastructure of social responsibility that connected elite families to the broader community. Nefertiti's first concern isn't protecting her own family's possessions, but ensuring that the dozens of people whose livelihoods depend on her household's prosperity have the resources they need to survive the crisis. Storage facilities are opened to provide emergency supplies for servants' families. Credit is extended to craftsmen and suppliers whose businesses face disruption. Employment opportunities are created for workers displaced by flooding in other sectors. This systematic approach to crisis management illustrates one of the most important but least understood aspects of Egyptian social organization: how wealthy families served as economic stabilizers that helped entire communities weather natural disasters and social disruptions. The prosperity concentrated in elite households wasn't just personal wealth, but community resources that could be mobilized quickly when circumstances demanded collective action. The technical challenges of protecting valuable possessions during flood season require expertise that spans multiple crafts and specializations. Precious textiles must be treated with preservatives and stored in specially designed containers. Jewelry and precious metals need protection from moisture and temperature changes that could cause permanent damage. Documents and records require waterproof storage that maintains accessibility while ensuring long-term preservation. These preservation activities reveal the sophisticated understanding of materials science that characterized wealthy Egyptian households. Nefertiti personally supervises the application of protective treatments that represent generations of accumulated knowledge about how different materials respond to environmental stress. The techniques she employs would be recognizable to modern conservators as scientifically sound approaches to preserving valuable objects. But the most crucial aspect of flood preparation involves the social and economic relationships that wealthy families must maintain to preserve their position during times of uncertainty. Contracts with suppliers need modification to account for changed transportation schedules. Agreements with customers require adjustment to reflect new delivery timelines and availability constraints. Credit arrangements with business partners must be restructured to accommodate the financial pressures that natural disasters create throughout the economic system. These negotiations reveal the complex web of obligations and dependencies that characterized Egyptian commercial relationships. Wealthy families like Nefertiti's weren't independent actors who could simply protect their own interests. They were nodes in networks of mutual dependence that required constant attention and careful management. Success during crisis periods depended as much on maintaining these relationships as on protecting physical assets. The flood's early arrival also exposes the political dimensions of wealth management in Egyptian society. Wealthy families were expected to contribute to community disaster relief efforts, both through direct assistance and by maintaining economic activities that provided employment and stability during difficult periods. These obligations weren't just social expectations. They were practical necessities that preserved the conditions necessary for long-term prosperity. As morning turns to afternoon and the full implications of early flooding become clear, the three worlds we've been following reveal their deep interconnections in ways that demonstrate the true genius of Egyptian civilization. The fish that Khaemweset catches under challenging conditions become essential food supplies for the craftsmen whose workshops produce the specialized items that wealthy households need to survive the crisis. The furniture that Amenhotep creates with flood-resistant techniques protects the possessions that represent generations of accumulated wealth. The resources that Nefertiti's household mobilizes provide the economic stability that allows ordinary families to adapt and thrive despite natural disasters. This circular flow of goods, services, and support creates a resilience that no individual family or social class could achieve alone. The Egyptian understanding that individual prosperity depends on community stability produced social institutions and economic practices that could respond effectively to challenges that destroyed less organized civilizations. The early flood also reveals how Egyptian society balanced tradition with innovation in ways that promoted both stability and adaptability. Traditional knowledge about flood patterns and survival techniques provides the foundation for responding to current challenges. But that knowledge is constantly updated and refined through direct experience and systematic observation. The result is a culture that honors the wisdom of ancestors while remaining flexible enough to handle unprecedented situations. As the day progresses and Egyptian communities along the Nile adjust to their changed circumstances, the activities we've observed illustrate principles that sustained this remarkable civilization for over 3,000 years. The careful balance between individual achievement and collective welfare, the systematic accumulation and sharing of practical knowledge, the sophisticated economic networks that connected local communities to regional and international markets, the social institutions that provided security while rewarding innovation and excellence. But perhaps most importantly, this single day reveals how ordinary Egyptian families understood their lives as part of something larger than themselves, a civilization that had endured for centuries and would endure for centuries more, sustained by the daily labor and intelligence of millions of people who found meaning and purpose in contributing to the common good while pursuing their individual dreams and ambitions. The afternoon sun beats down on the swollen river as communities throughout the Nile Valley continue their ancient dance of adaptation and survival, each family's story contributing to the larger narrative of human civilization's greatest achievement, learning to thrive in harmony with the natural forces that sustain all life. The early flood that began this day as a crisis is already becoming an opportunity for those wise enough to understand that in Egypt, as in life itself, change is the only constant, and success belongs to those who can flow like the river itself, powerful, persistent, and eternally renewed. But what happens next reveals something that will completely change how you understand ancient Egyptian society. As afternoon shadows stretch across the flood-swollen Nile, a single event is about to demonstrate just how sophisticated these seemingly simple communities really were. A royal messenger arrives at the riverbank, his official papyrus bearing the Pharaoh's seal and a decree that sends ripples through every household we've been following. The early flood has triggered something remarkable, a kingdom-wide emergency response system that operates with precision that would impress modern disaster management experts. What you're about to witness is nothing short of miraculous. How an ancient civilization mobilized resources across hundreds of miles with no computers, no telephones, no modern communication systems whatsoever. The messenger's arrival at Chemwaset's village isn't random. He's part of a coordinated network that reaches every fishing community along the Nile within hours of the flood's acceleration. The message he carries transforms individual survival efforts into collective action on a scale that defies everything we think we know about ancient societies. Every boat, every net, every skilled fisherman suddenly becomes part of a massive food production operation designed to prevent famine during the critical weeks ahead. Here's what makes this absolutely extraordinary. The system activating around Chemwaset operates without central planning or modern logistics. Instead, it relies on something far more powerful. Generations of accumulated knowledge about how communities respond to crisis, encoded in social relationships, so sophisticated they function like living algorithms. When the messenger reads the Pharaoh's decree, he's not giving orders to confused villagers. He's triggering responses that these communities have rehearsed through countless flood cycles, refined through success and failure until they operate with mechanical precision. The transformation that overtakes the fishing village in the next few hours reveals ancient Egypt's greatest secret. These weren't primitive people struggling against nature. They were participants in a civilization that had solved problems of resource management and social coordination that challenge modern societies. The casual efficiency with which families reorganize their activities, the smooth coordination between different villages, the rapid deployment of specialized knowledge, all of this represents institutional wisdom that took centuries to develop and perfect. Watch what happens as Chemwaset responds to the royal decree. His movements aren't hurried or panicked. Instead, he follows procedures that are so deeply ingrained they feel like natural responses. He secures his family's immediate food needs, then shifts his entire operation toward maximum production for community distribution. His nets are deployed according to patterns optimized for flood conditions. His preservation techniques switch to methods that prioritize quantity and durability over immediate consumption quality. But the most remarkable aspect of this transformation is how individual expertise suddenly becomes collective knowledge. Chemwaset's decades of experience reading flood patterns aren't just personal assets. They become community resources that benefit everyone. The young fishermen who normally work independently suddenly operate as coordinated teams, their individual skills amplified through cooperation that emerges automatically when circumstances demand it. This spontaneous organization reveals something profound about Egyptian social structure that formal hierarchies completely miss. Beneath the rigid class system that governed normal times lay networks of practical cooperation that could activate instantly when survival was at stake. The fisherman whose daily life seemed constrained by low social status suddenly becomes a crucial specialist whose knowledge and skills are desperately needed by people far above him in the formal hierarchy. The economic implications of this emergency mobilization are staggering. Within hours, fishing communities throughout the kingdom shift from local subsistence to industrial-scale food production. The surplus that normally supported modest trade relationships becomes the foundation for massive resource redistribution that prevents regional famines and maintains social stability during the kingdom's most vulnerable period. This isn't just disaster relief, it's economic engineering that operates without bureaucracy, without complex regulations, without any of the administrative machinery we associate with large-scale social coordination. The speed with which this transformation occurs demonstrates the hidden infrastructure of Egyptian civilization, the social capital built through generations of mutual dependence and shared experience. When crisis strikes, communities don't need to learn cooperation from scratch. They activate relationships and procedures that already exist, tested through previous emergencies and refined through constant practice. As afternoon progresses and the emergency response system reaches full activation, the connections between our three families become visible in ways that illuminate the true structure of Egyptian society. The increased fish production in Kayemweset's village creates immediate demand for the specialized storage containers that craftsmen like Amenhotep produce. The transportation networks that carry preserved fish to urban markets require the logistical coordination that wealthy merchants like Jehuti provide. Each family's response to crisis strengthens the others, creating resilience that emerges from interdependence rather than independence. But the most revealing aspect of this emergency response is how it exposes the sophisticated information systems that kept Egyptian civilization functioning across vast distances and diverse environments. The royal messenger who triggered the fishing village's mobilization is part of a communication network that rivals modern intelligence services in speed and accuracy. Information flows both ways. Reports about local conditions, resource availability, and emerging problems travel back to regional administrators, who can redirect resources and adjust strategies in real time. This information infrastructure represents one of ancient Egypt's most impressive achievements, yet it operated through human relationships rather than technological systems. The trust networks that connected fishermen to craftsmen to merchants to officials created communication channels that could rapidly transmit both data and nuanced understanding across the entire kingdom. When modern archaeologists marvel at Egyptian administrative efficiency, they're seeing the end result of social technologies that were far more sophisticated than the physical tools these people used. The afternoon's developments also reveal how Egyptian society balanced individual achievement with collective welfare in ways that promoted both personal success and community stability. Kayemweset's expertise as a fisherman becomes more valuable during the emergency, but that value is shared with his community rather than hoarded for personal advantage. Amenhotep's skills as a craftsman are redirected toward community needs, but this redirection enhances rather than diminishes his long-term prospects. Wealthy families like Nefertiti's invest resources in community support, but these investments strengthen the economic networks that generate their prosperity. This balance between individual and collective interests represents one of Egyptian civilization's most sophisticated innovations. Unlike societies that rely on either pure individualism or complete collectivism, Egypt developed institutions that channeled personal ambition toward community benefit, while ensuring that individual excellence was recognized and rewarded. The result was a system that could mobilize collective action during crises, while maintaining the incentives for innovation and achievement that drove long-term progress. The technical innovations that emerged during the afternoon's emergency response demonstrate how crisis situations accelerated Egyptian technological development. Fishing techniques adapted to flood conditions require new approaches to net construction and deployment. Food preservation methods must be modified to handle increased volumes while maintaining quality standards. Transportation systems need rapid adjustment to move resources through changed geographical conditions. These innovations don't emerge from formal research and development programs. Instead, they arise from the practical intelligence of people who understand their environment so thoroughly that they can adapt their techniques almost instinctively when conditions change. The accumulated knowledge of generations combines with immediate necessity to produce solutions that are both technically sophisticated and immediately practical. But perhaps the most impressive aspect of this innovation process is how quickly successful techniques spread through the community and beyond. A fishing method developed by one village in the morning becomes standard practice throughout the region by evening. A preservation technique discovered by necessity in one household is refined and adopted by dozens of families within hours. This rapid knowledge transfer operates through informal networks that function more efficiently than formal educational institutions. The social dynamics that enable this knowledge sharing reveal another dimension of Egyptian civilization's success. Competition between individuals and families coexists with cooperation that benefits the broader community. People share innovations freely because they understand that community-wide prosperity creates more opportunities for individual success than hoarding knowledge for temporary advantage. This long-term thinking characterizes successful Egyptian families at every social level. As the afternoon emergency response reaches full effectiveness, the scale of coordination that's been achieved becomes visible across the entire Nile Valley. Hundreds of fishing villages operating according to similar principles. Thousands of craftsmen redirecting their skills toward emergency needs. Wealthy households throughout the kingdom mobilizing resources for community support. Government officials at every level coordinating responses that span vast distances and diverse local conditions. This coordinated response represents one of history's most impressive examples of large-scale social organization achieved without modern technology. The kingdom that emerges during crisis situations reveals capacities for collective action that surpass many contemporary societies, despite their advanced communication and transportation systems. The secret lies in social technologies, institutions, and relationships that took centuries to develop but could activate instantly when circumstances demanded coordinated response. The afternoon's developments also demonstrate how Egyptian society maintained stability while adapting to changing conditions. The emergency response system preserves essential social structures while modifying specific practices to meet immediate needs. Traditional hierarchies remain intact even as practical cooperation crosses class boundaries. Cultural values and religious beliefs provide continuity while specific techniques and strategies evolve rapidly in response to environmental challenges. This balance between stability and adaptability represents one of the most sophisticated achievements of Egyptian civilization. Societies that are too rigid cannot adapt to changing conditions and eventually collapse. Societies that are too flexible lose the institutional memory and social cohesion necessary for long-term survival. Egypt developed institutions that could maintain cultural continuity while encouraging the innovations necessary for continued prosperity in an unpredictable environment. The late afternoon sun casts long shadows across the transformed landscape as communities throughout the Nile Valley continue their coordinated response to the early flood. What began as individual families adapting to changed conditions has become a kingdom-wide demonstration of social organization that reveals the true foundations of Egyptian greatness. The fishing villages, craft workshops, and wealthy households that seemed separate during normal times have revealed themselves as components of a larger system designed to ensure collective survival and prosperity. The connections between Kayem-Wasset's nets, Amenhotep's workshop, and Nefertiti's household represent just tiny visible portions of networks that extend throughout the kingdom and beyond. The fish caught in remote villages feeds workers in urban workshops. The furniture created by provincial craftsmen graces palaces and temples in the capital. The grain traded by wealthy merchants sustains communities throughout the ancient world. But the most remarkable aspect of this interconnected system is how it operates through voluntary cooperation rather than centralized control. The Pharaoh's decree that triggered the afternoon's mobilization didn't create the response system. It activated relationships and procedures that already existed. The real power of Egyptian civilization lay not in royal authority, but in the social intelligence that enabled millions of people to coordinate their activities for mutual benefit. This social intelligence represents humanity's greatest achievement, learning to create prosperity through cooperation while maintaining the individual freedom and initiative that drive innovation and progress. The Egyptian solution to this fundamental challenge sustained one of history's longest-lived civilizations and created cultural achievements that continue to inspire wonder thousands of years after the kingdom's political power ended. As evening approaches and the day's emergency mobilization settles into sustainable patterns that will continue through the flood season, the three families we followed prepare for rest after their most challenging and revealing day. Tomorrow will bring new adaptations and continued coordination. But tonight, they can rest knowing they're part of something larger than themselves. A civilization that has learned to thrive by understanding that individual success and collective welfare are not competing goals, but complementary aspects of human flourishing. The sounds that settle over the Nile Valley as darkness falls carry the same rhythms that have provided the soundtrack for Egyptian life for millennia. The splash of oars, the call of nightbirds, the distant chanting from temple ceremonies. But now these familiar sounds carry new meaning, revealing themselves as components of a symphony of civilization that continues to play long after individual performers have completed their parts. The pre-dawn hours bring a different kind of awakening to the Nile Valley, one that reveals the deepest mysteries of how Egyptian civilization actually functioned. As Kamwaset secures his boat after the day's extraordinary mobilization, something unprecedented begins to unfold along the riverbank. The emergency response that transformed individual survival into collective action is about to reveal its most sophisticated element, a phenomenon that modern historians have barely begun to understand. What happens next will completely shatter everything you think you know about ancient Egyptian society, because hidden beneath the surface of today's crisis response lies a system so advanced, so perfectly calibrated to human nature and environmental reality, that it makes our modern institutions look primitive by comparison. The evening gathering that forms spontaneously along the muddy shore isn't just fishermen sharing the day's experiences. It's the activation of something extraordinary, a living library of environmental knowledge that has been accumulating for over 1,000 years. Every flood cycle, every seasonal variation, every unusual weather pattern that has affected this stretch of river exists not in written records, but in the collective memory of families who have witnessed and survived countless natural cycles. Listen to what's happening as these men and women share their observations from today's fishing. Kamwaset describes subtle changes in water temperature that indicate the flood's likely duration. Seneb reports bird behavior that suggests fish migration patterns 3 weeks in advance. Merit shares her grandmother's techniques for predicting exactly when the waters will recede. Knowledge passed down through generations of women who managed household resources through dozens of flood cycles. But here's what makes this absolutely mind-blowing. This isn't just storytelling or casual conversation. It's a sophisticated data analysis system that processes environmental information with accuracy that rivals modern meteorological science. These people are conducting real-time scientific research using methods that integrate centuries of accumulated observation with immediate sensory data. The predictions that emerge from tonight's gathering will prove accurate to within days over the coming weeks. Water levels, fish populations, weather patterns, even social and economic disruptions, all forecasted through collective intelligence that operates without instruments, without written records, without any of the tools we associate with scientific prediction. This is pure human intelligence operating at levels that our technology-dependent civilization has largely forgotten how to achieve. What's even more remarkable is how this knowledge gets transmitted and preserved. The children sitting at the edges of tonight's gathering aren't just listening to entertaining stories. They're absorbing information that will make them successful adults 30 years from now. Every detail they hear tonight becomes part of their personal database of survival knowledge, ready for instant recall when they face similar challenges in their own lifetimes. The educational system that's operating here makes formal schools look almost primitive. These children are learning through direct participation in real problem-solving situations, where mistakes have immediate consequences and success brings tangible rewards. They're not memorizing abstract information. They're building practical skills through guided experience with master practitioners who have survived everything the Nile can throw at human communities. Watch how young Katie absorbs his father's explanation of current patterns during flood season. He's not just hearing words, He's integrating visual observations, tactile sensations, and emotional responses into a complex understanding that will guide his decisions for the rest of his life. This is education that engages every aspect of human intelligence, creating knowledge that becomes instinctive rather than merely intellectual. The social dynamics of this knowledge transmission reveal something profound about Egyptian civilization's longevity. Information flows freely between generations, not because of formal requirements, but because survival depends on everyone having access to the best available knowledge. The old fisherman who shares his most guarded secrets with young competitors isn't being altruistic. He's ensuring that his community has the skills necessary to support him when age limits his own capabilities. This reciprocal relationship between knowledge sharing and long-term security created incentives for continuous learning and innovation that operated throughout Egyptian society. People didn't hoard expertise because they understood that community-wide competence generated more opportunities for individual success than temporary advantages gained through secrecy. This long-term thinking characterized successful Egyptian communities at every level of society. The technical discussions that emerge from tonight's gathering reveal innovations that wouldn't look out of place in modern engineering journals. Modifications to net designs that increase efficiency while reducing labor requirements. Preservation techniques that maintain nutritional value while extending storage life. Transportation methods that minimize spoilage during the challenging conditions created by flood season. These innovations don't emerge from formal research and development programs. Instead, they arise from the practical intelligence of people who understand their environment so completely that they can predict how changes in one variable will affect entire systems. The fisherman who adjusts his net mesh to account for different water temperatures isn't just following tradition. He's applying principles of fluid dynamics and fish behavior that he's internalized through years of direct observation. But perhaps the most impressive aspect of this innovation process is how rapidly successful techniques spread beyond their point of origin. A fishing method developed through necessity in one village becomes standard practice throughout the region within days. Preservation techniques discovered by accident in one household are refined and adopted by dozens of families before the next flood cycle. This knowledge transfer operates through networks that function more efficiently than modern professional journals. The economic implications of this rapid innovation diffusion are staggering. Communities that can quickly adopt and improve upon new techniques gain competitive advantages that translate into higher incomes and better living standards. But because knowledge spreads freely, these advantages are temporary, creating incentives for continuous innovation that drive technological progress throughout the entire region. As the evening gathering reaches its peak intensity, something even more extraordinary begins to emerge. The local knowledge being shared tonight isn't isolated to this single village. It's part of a vast information network that extends throughout the Nile Valley and beyond. Fishermen who travel between communities carry techniques and observations that connect distant regions into a coordinated system of environmental monitoring and response. The messenger who triggered today's emergency mobilization represents just the visible tip of this information network. Beneath the official communication system lies an informal intelligence apparatus that processes environmental, economic, and social data with sophistication that would impress modern analysts. Traders, craftsmen, religious pilgrims, and ordinary travelers all contribute to information flows that keep Egyptian communities informed about conditions and opportunities across vast distances. This informal intelligence network operates according to principles that balance individual advantage with collective benefit. Traders share information about market conditions because they understand that regional prosperity generates more opportunities than local advantages maintained through secrecy. Craftsmen discuss technical innovations because they know that industry-wide improvements benefit everyone more than temporary competitive edges. Even competitors cooperate in information sharing because they recognize that accurate intelligence serves everyone's long-term interests. The conversations that flow around tonight's fires reveal how Egyptian society integrated local knowledge with regional and international awareness in ways that created remarkable strategic intelligence. Discussion of today's fishing conditions leads naturally to analysis of grain prices in distant markets. Observations about bird migration patterns connect to insights about political developments in neighbouring kingdoms. Local environmental changes are understood in the context of broader climatic patterns that affect trade routes and military campaigns. This integration of local and global perspectives represents one of Egyptian civilization's most sophisticated achievements. Communities that were geographically isolated maintained awareness of developments that could affect their long-term prospects. Families that seemed focused on immediate survival actually operated according to strategic thinking that spanned generations and incorporated factors from across the known world. The religious dimensions of tonight's gathering add another layer of sophistication that modern secular societies often miss. The prayers and offerings that accompany technical discussions aren't separate activities. They're integral parts of the knowledge management system that keeps Egyptian communities functioning effectively. Religious rituals encode practical information about seasonal cycles, preserve cultural memory about successful survival strategies, and reinforce social bonds that make cooperation possible during crisis situations. The shrine to Sobek that receives tonight's offerings isn't just a focus for religious devotion. It's a repository of practical wisdom about living successfully along the Nile. The stories associated with the crocodile god contain detailed information about river behavior, flood patterns, and survival techniques that have been tested through generations of experience. Religious practice and practical knowledge integrate so completely that separating them would destroy the effectiveness of both. This integration of spiritual and practical dimensions reflects a sophisticated understanding of human psychology and social organization that modern institutions often lack. Egyptian religious practices didn't compete with practical knowledge. They enhanced it by providing emotional support, social cohesion, and cultural continuity that made effective action possible during stressful situations. The result was a system that could maintain high performance levels even under extreme pressure. As the evening progresses and families begin to drift back to their homes, the conversations that continue in smaller groups reveal the personal dimensions of today's collective achievement. Individual families assess their performance during the emergency response, identifying successes to build upon and mistakes to avoid in future crises. These private evaluations contribute to the continuous improvement process that kept Egyptian communities adapting and evolving despite their apparent traditionalism. The planning discussions that emerge from these family consultations demonstrate the sophisticated strategic thinking that characterized successful Egyptian households. Decisions made tonight about resource allocation, skill development, and relationship building will affect family prosperity for years to come. Parents discuss their children's education in terms of preparing for challenges that might not emerge for decades. Young adults consider marriage prospects based on assessments of long-term economic and social trends. This forward-thinking approach to family strategy reflects a cultural sophistication that enabled Egyptian civilization to maintain stability while adapting to changing conditions. Families that could balance immediate needs with long-term objectives were more likely to thrive through multiple crisis cycles. Communities composed of such families developed resilience that allowed them to recover quickly from disasters and take advantage of opportunities that emerged from changing circumstances. The technical preparations that occupy families as they prepare for tomorrow's continuation of emergency operations reveal another dimension of Egyptian practical intelligence. Equipment modifications that seemed improvised during today's crisis are actually applications of engineering principles that have been refined through generations of experimentation. Preservation techniques that appear traditional are actually sophisticated applications of chemistry and biology that achieve results comparable to modern food science. The efficiency with which these technical adaptations are implemented demonstrates the depth of practical knowledge that Egyptian families maintained as part of their cultural inheritance. Skills that modern societies require years of formal education to develop were transmitted naturally through daily participation in family and community activities. The result was a population with technical competence that far exceeded what formal educational measures would suggest. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of tonight's activities is how they reveal the emotional and psychological dimension